I'm Luke Story. For the past 22 years, I've been relentlessly committed to my deepest passion, designing the ultimate lifestyle based on the most powerful principles of spirituality, health, psychology, and personal development. The Lifestylist Podcast is a show dedicated to sharing my discoveries and the experts behind them with you. So, Garrett, you're known as the health engineer. What's that mean?
Well, I was fortunate enough to find a way to take my academic training in engineering and funnel it into an area that I'm super passionate about and that I love. So my training both is engineering and neuroscience. And I think this is a great way to blend those.
Oh, that's interesting because that's exactly what you did with your NeuFit technology, right? Is because it's based on the nervous system, which we're going to learn about, hence the neurology, but then also you got to understand engineering to put this together and not electrocute someone, basically. Tell me, I guess I want to start at the journey of how did you first create this? Like, I'm always interested in, like that show, How It's Made, I think it's called, or something. Like, I love that. So you're in school studying engineering, or you get out. At what point did you start to hire someone to actually build you a device? What was the initial kind of test unit you had or prototype?
Well, the initial catalyst was really an experience I had back when I was playing ice hockey in college, where I had some torn ligaments. I was told I would need surgery and I was going to be out for 3 or 4 months. And I met a doctor who was doing functional neurology and using an older version at the time, but using direct current. And he was the first one to show me that the nervous system is important. The neurological response to injury and trauma oftentimes delays or impairs or blocks the healing process, or slows it down and just leads to poor outcomes overall. How the nervous system can be guarding, protecting, inhibiting, shutting down muscles in the area. In some ways that could mean it's just cutting off blood flow and impairing the body's ability to send the nutrients and raw materials there to rebuild, for example. So learning that and then seeing firsthand the power of direct current and how creating a direct electric field and this electric field gradient can help to orient and accelerate the cells that control healing and regeneration of bone and muscle, connective tissue, and nerves. For me, it was connective tissue in my ligaments, but I saw that the going through that experience, my ligaments healed on their own in 2.5 weeks. I avoided surgery altogether. And for me, it was this amazing experience for two reasons. The first is that I was able to avoid surgery and play hockey again sooner. So it was wonderful in that regard. But even more meaningful now is that because I was a physics major at the time, pre-engineering, set to go to graduate school for engineering, for me to find a treatment paradigm or approach that made sense from first principles, looking at it from an engineering scientific perspective, that to me was the biggest aha moment, the most wonderful, discovery experience. And going through that, I just felt called to share this work with as many people as I could. And so I came here to Austin about 15 years ago for graduate school in engineering. And while I was here, I was really passionate about this work and ended up working with the chiropractor for the University of Texas football team. And he had a private practice in town here. So I got 150 square feet in his office and started using older versions of direct current. And we're working with him and treating people for various injuries. In the beginning, it was mostly athletes like me, helping them heal faster. But we started getting these really wonderful outcomes and it was growing. And I kept seeing over those first 6, 7, 8 years, kept seeing things I wanted the technology to be able to do, ways that I wanted to make it better. And so my engineering mind was kind of going in the background. I ended up, because I was passionate about the work, I ended up going back to graduate school in neuroscience too. But throughout all this, looking at it as an engineer was, had some challenges because I had a lot of learning to do, but also was a real blessing. And it allowed me to look at problems related to health and musculoskeletal issues, I think in a new, unique and effective way, but also helped me see opportunities to make these breakthroughs in technology. And so eventually, after those 7 or 8 years, finally just said, you know what, I don't think anyone else is going to do this. I need to do it myself. And so then I got some more sophisticated electrical engineers, started prototyping. At the time, I'm kind of glad I didn't know quite how long and how expensive and how challenging the process was going to be because I may not may not have done it.
Oh my God. I can only imagine.
But I'm so grateful that I did. And now it's been 5 years since we got the FDA clearance and launched the Neubie.
Oh, only that long. I guess that's around the time I met you the first time. I think it would have been probably at Paleo Effects or the Bulletproof Conference or something.
Probably the like 2018
Yeah.
bulletproof.
Yeah, maybe that was it. So
Yeah.
that's interesting. So you're pretty new on the scene in terms of like what you're doing with this company now.
Yeah, yeah. So we just crossed over 5 years, and it's very cool to see that we've been able to certify a few thousand physical therapists, chiropractors, athletic trainers, and other professionals.
Yeah, I was
But
looking at your site today, actually doing my homework, and it says that NeuFit is used by 250 practices slash clinics, 1,000 certified practitioners, 6 universities, and 13 pro sports teams. Now, that's pretty badass in 5 years.
that's right. Well, we got to update the numbers. It's over 2,000 certified practice. I don't know what the exact number is,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, at the first Major League Baseball team to work with it was the Washington Nationals, and they got it. So they were the first team. They got one in early 2019, just before the season started. They ended up getting a second one during that season because the players were fighting over it. Their general manager wanted to get treated, and the players were using it. So he said, "You know what? Let's get another one." And so they ended up going on and winning the World Series that year.
Oh, no way.
And so I
I
got
know
to
nothing about sports, so I wouldn't even know that. You could like make up a fake baseball team and I wouldn't know. But they won. That's pretty badass.
It was cool. And then one of the players on that team who contributed in a major way in the World Series is a guy named Anthony Rendon. And so he very graciously wrote a endorsement or I don't know, a blurb
Testimonial
for
or
the
whatever.
for my book.
Oh, cool.
And he talks about how he had back pain that would cause him to miss games, many seasons, and it was coming back on towards the end of the regular season. And in his first session, his athletic trainer, who's a wonderful guy, he came and spent a day or two with us here in Austin, learned everything, and was just fabulous, a real leader in the sports medicine space. And so he did the mapping process and found where he had some of that neurological guarding protection, from fatigue, from trauma, from bad habits, from the rigors of a long baseball season. And in one session, he noticed significant relief in his back, and so he started using it every day for just like 2 or 3 minutes to warm up, prime his muscles, activate before games, and he was able to play through when he was afraid he was going to be missing games. He was able to play through the playoffs, the World Series. He felt great. He went out. He hit a home run in Game 7. He hit a couple during the World Series and helped them win. And just it was this wonderful thing. So I got to
That's
connect
cool.
with. It really is a wonderful guy too. Got to connect with him and some of the other players and staff and everything. It's been fun how it goes in all these different directions you don't necessarily anticipate.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. It's fun for me as a fan of, all of these brands and people that I interview. It's really cool for me, especially when I see someone at the inception of launching a company or some, wacky biohacking device and I have them on the podcast or they're on other podcasts and then I see them start to scale and awareness and then, an athlete gets a hold of it or a celebrity or something. Next thing you know, it's like they're in the game. It's really cool. So congratulations. Um, Back to the inception. I'm always curious when I meet someone and they have a very sophisticated, elegant technology like you have here. I mean, I have this thing here in the house. Alice and I are obsessed with it now that we have one. It's beautifully designed. Everything works perfectly. It's just a really great piece of equipment. And what I'm always curious about was there a stage when like one of the engineers you hired was building it in his garage and it was real crude and ugly and didn't have the functionality and the sophistication that this has? Were there like a number of different versions of it before this?
There were. So we actually, part of why and how I was able to, get the product launched was a series of wonderful serendipities, which I think is a sign that somehow I was on the right path. And so we had a client, a patient in our office who owns real estate and leased some of it to an engineering firm here in Austin. So we started working with them and I went to their office and they were doing all these sophisticated, I don't know, some of it's probably confidential, like military. They were doing this thing where it could detect different molecules, different scents in the air, like 200 of them, and it could tell you, it's like if there were any explosives around, but it could detect other. It was
Oh,
just
wow.
so for them, when I showed them this, they were like, "Oh yeah, that's fairly easy compared to some of the other stuff that they're doing." So the first one was just like a little looked like a little chipboard, and it was run by a computer with wires going to it just to make sure we could get the signal out of it. So there was no case, no user interface, was just a couple buttons on a computer screen. So it was that, and then there was a process of trying to find an enclosure and get the plastic pieces and the industrial design and stuff like that. So it's definitely iterative, not necessarily in a garage, because with an FDA product, there's a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of guidelines
If you're
for
running
how you have to
electricity
do
through,
things.
yeah, if you're running electricity through people's bodies, probably can't just wing it, you know?
That's right. That's right. So there's a lot of procedures, design and verification and validation.
Right.
But it's a team effort. I mean, electrical, mechanical, industrial design, user, people who have real expertise and user experience. Then there's a really fascinating process of actually putting it in front of users and saying, like, okay, can you figure out how to use this? What feedback do you have? Is any of this clunky or not intuitive or difficult to understand? And so you make some iterative changes like that too.
Cool, cool. I guess tell us about define direct current therapy.
So direct current means that the electric field or the flow of electrons is going in one direction, and the contrast to that is alternating current. So there's this historical battle between Edison and Westinghouse, and Tesla's involved. This battle over, should we use alternating current or direct current in our electrical grid, and alternating current won out for a variety of reasons there. But in our bodies, we exist on direct current, and there's a couple ways to think about it. One kind of image or way to think about it is to think of a highway. So if you're on a highway, you have a northbound lane and you have a southbound lane, and cars don't travel south in the northbound lane or vice versa. So they're only going in one direction, in the appropriate direction on that pathway. And just like that, we have pathways in our body from the brain down to the body, where the brain transmits signals to turn on or off, or up or down regulate muscles and organs and different tissues in the body. And then we have pathways that go from the body up to the spinal cord into the brain to report what's going on. And those are direct current pathways. And so just conceptually, there's some value proposition there, I think, for using direct current. But where it really comes into play is two effects. One being more structural and one being more functional. Structurally, I mentioned this a little bit when I talked about this doctor who was doing functional neurology using direct current, about how the direct current electric field gradient has been shown in a variety of animal models to help orient and accelerate the function of osteoblasts, myoblasts, fibroblasts. And what that means is those are cells that control the healing and regeneration of bone, muscle, connective tissue, these different tissues or different structures that can be damaged, that would need to heal or regenerate. Nerves also, we're doing some really cool work with neuropathy patients and seeing some regeneration of nerves. So we believe there's an effect there, working to quantify the outcomes there. And so there's that structural component. There's also a functional component. I think this is what we're really better known for, because the physical therapists, the chiropractors, the other professionals that use this with their patients, what they often find is that 90% or more of patients notice tangible progress in their first visit. They notice that it creates these wow moments for patients, which is great for them, because it makes the patients want to continue to come in and complete their plan of care, or refer their friends and family and colleagues, or whatever it might be. And so they like that. But what's happening there, if someone comes in with shoulder pain and they can't raise their arm past about here, and then in one session their arm is up overhead, that is obviously, in 10 minutes of actual work on the machine, their ligaments not healing. It's not going back together, right? So there's no real structural change there. What's happening is a functional change. What's happening is that their brain, because the brain is oriented towards survival and protection, their brain was limiting movement there as a protective mechanism. And there's value in those protective mechanisms, but oftentimes they're set too conservatively because of bad habits, because of injuries. Use it or lose it is a very real thing. And so those habits kind of contribute to this. But the the cool thing that we're able to do with this direct current is, in these cases, scan around on the body, do this mapping process where instead of alternating current where the signal is going back and forth, positive, negative, it's going to be causing muscle contractions, especially agonist, antagonist, co-contractions. So like if your bicep and tricep were fighting against each other, like if you were driving your car, hitting the throttle and the brake pedal at the same time, resisting your own movements. With direct current, we're able to bypass certainly that agonist, antagonist, co-contraction. We're able to bypass actually a lot of the contraction overall and send a lot more neurological sensory input into the body, into the nervous system. So that allows us to do this mapping process. So we can send these neurological signals to find where the nervous system is guarding, protecting, shutting down those muscles, where there's a hypersensitivity associated with pain. And once we find those, we're able to send these neurological inputs to make these functional changes very quickly. So the name for this would be neuromuscular re-education, re-educating or teaching the nervous system to function in a new way. And so, like I said, over 90% of patients notice progress in their first session because of these neurological changes. So the direct current allows us to communicate more powerfully and more precisely with the nervous system. And that often leads to these kind of wow moments or this early progress. But if there's tissue damage, it also, the direct current, that influence there can help with the healing and some of that longer term tissue as well. And then one interesting thing very closely related that often comes up is people say, well, is there any risk? Like, are you setting someone up for problems if you're affecting these protective mechanisms or something like that? And that's a very good question because we have these protective mechanisms for a reason. I mentioned our brain is oriented towards survival. Number one priority is to make sure we live to see tomorrow. And our brains are willing to sacrifice intellectual ability, our ability to do math or have executive function. They're willing to sacrifice our ability to throw a baseball or jump high or run fast because our brains don't want us to exert too much energy, don't want us to move, to stretch too far, run too fast, create too much tension. We don't want to tear our tendons off our bones or risk of injury or risk that we might deplete ourselves of energy if there's a famine tomorrow. Very, deep survival-based parts of the brain. And so the, excuse me. So the survival and protection there of the brain, it is, I lost my train of thought now.
Well, we're talking about, is there a risk in the body shutting down its defense mechanism, right?
Yes.
So if you have a range of if I injured my elbow 20 years ago and now I have a limited range of motion, there's actually, it doesn't need as much protection. It's overcompensating. I think that's where you were going.
Exactly. Thank you. So interesting thing about this is that with those protective mechanisms, if there is real damage, like I mentioned this case where someone comes in with shoulder pain and they can only lift, to here 45 degrees or something, and then they're lifting up all the way overhead. If in that case, the issue, there may have been some tissue damage, but there the limitation was more that functional response, that neurological response to injury and trauma. And then in the case where, it actually is more of a structural issue. It's less about the functional response. That's important, but it is more about the structure is compromised and there's a problem here. In those cases, we'll do that treatment and they may only gain 5 degrees of range of motion or something like that. So we're not just overriding or hijacking anything. What we're doing is presenting that input and allowing the brain to recalibrate what an appropriate level really is. So there's almost a diagnostic component to it. You can tell by working with someone how much of their issue really is a structural problem, how much of it is more of a functional problem. And of course, clinicians have to use their judgment. We don't want to be reckless. If you need to get imaging done or if there's like a serious tear or something's fractured, use your clinical judgment and be responsible in those cases, of course. But this kind of quasi-diagnostic value of telling how structural or how functional the issue is something that a lot of practitioners really, really like and use.
It's also fascinating as the patient or client to do that mapping. And hopefully before we're done, if we have time, we can show the mapping here with the device. People that are watching on the video, you'll see we actually have the thing here because it lives right there in the hallway. I haven't gotten into the deep therapy with it yet, which we'll talk about, but it is like a great cheat for me if my lower back hurts, which is unfortunately 90% of my life. 5 minutes on this and it's gone. You know, I haven't permanently healed it yet, but we'll talk about the training. But when I first met you at these conferences, one of the things that I thought was so fascinating was I'd ask you, okay, well, I got, you know, my shoulder hurts up here, like my rotator cuff, maybe I think you call it, or whatever this is up here. Deltoid. No, it's like on the deltoid. And so I'd be like, yeah, it hurts right there. And then you would do the mapping with the little wet sponge thing. And you would find that the hot spot, the part that really got activated was like on my back, on my scapula or something. And it's connected to that and it's related to that, but it's actually the pain is coming from somewhere else or the root of it. I don't know how to explain it, right? You can, but as someone who's having the mapping done, that's really fascinating because it seems like very often where you're experiencing the pain is not actually where the dysfunction or the injury even is. Could you explain that? Like why is our body getting signals in the wrong place is what it seems like, you know?
This is one of
It's
the
like if
reasons.
it's not my deltoid that hurt, then why does it hurt there if it's this other thing, you know?
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that I really advocate for doing this mapping process because patients go through that experience and like you said, you get on an area and it's like whoa, you can just really feel you get that kind of visceral sensation like yes, there's something there. I know we're not guessing, we're not poking and praying. There's really something going on there. So I think there's a lot of value in that from that patient experience perspective, but also from a clinician's perspective, it allows one to really get closer to the root cause of what's really going on so you can help people in a more meaningful way. And so I think a lot of people listening probably have heard of the concept of referred pain. That's something that could be going on here. But there's also this concept of, if the ankles or the hips are not working, are not as mobile or coordinated or strong, proficient as they need to be, a lot of times that causes issues in the knees, for example. And that's because the mechanics are going to be off. The feet, for example, are I like to think of them as like a megaphone where they amplify. So megaphone would amplify sound, feet amplify movement. So if your foot pronates or supinates, if it rotates 2 degrees, that might lead to 4 or 5 degrees of rotation of the tibia, 7, 8, 9 degrees at the femur. So it's this magnified rotation going up the leg. And so the mechanics of the feet can have a profound effect on creating these torsions or malalignments, misalignments, imbalances in the knee, for example, there. So when we're going through this process here, we're finding those areas, in your shoulder. We found some issues in some of the rotator cuff muscles and some of the stabilizers and movers of the scapula, the shoulder blade, and so there's a few different things going on there. But one of the things that I like to, or one of the kind of metaphors or images that I like is to use is that if you're working at a restaurant and you do one shift and you're supposed to be able to go home, but someone else doesn't show up and you have to stay and work their shift, you're gonna be you're gonna be feeling fatigued, or you're gonna be experiencing the pain as the person who's there working the second shift. But the problem is the person who didn't show up. That the root cause there is not the painful person. It's actually the person who didn't show up. So if a muscle isn't doing their job, sometimes another one is going to have to work double time, work that double shift, and in so doing, it will be kind of bracing, holding on, tugging and pulling on certain areas that can create misalignments that over time can lead to problems, or can just by creating tension can reduce blood flow, can create hypersensitivity. Something called C fibers can be activated, and you can get issues there. So being able to go upstream and figure out what's not working in the first place, I think, is very valuable. And anyone with clinical experience would probably agree with that. Where I think we're adding something is a way to identify those areas, going through this mapping process to really identify where that guarding, that inhibition, where those hypersensitivities are, that lead to issues with movement, but also even hypersensitivities and perception of threat in the nervous system that lead to chronic pain, even pain that lingers long after an injury has healed, and being able to help those people because chronic pain can be debilitating.
I'm well aware of that. I've had a lot of it in my life. I have a good life. I'm really healthy, but I would say pain is like one of the things. That's why when I found, your technology, I was like, this has to be in my life. But I like what you're saying here because I think that we often take a very mechanistic view of the body, right? We have a problem with our knee. We think, oh, I need to fix the knee, right? Rather than viewing the body as a whole system that wants to work with us, that wants to be in cooperation. And understanding these compensation patterns, I think, is really helpful. And then, of course, being able to, run the diagnostics and like actually get feedback from the body in the way that you've created. But this is something that took me a long time to start to understand that, the lower back pain I had for 20 years turns out is very likely caused by a lack of mobility in my hip. And so the hip has got to move, but it doesn't want to move because it's protecting itself. So it goes to the sacrum and is like, cool, we'll take range of motion from that so you can move about the world. And it feels like back pain, but it's really a hip thing, And this is years and years of working with all kinds of different great healers and different modalities and just piecing together the kind of the clues and the mystery of like, why does my goddamn back hurt every day? But I think it's so powerful to be able to identify the root cause. I mean, that just even the diagnostic, even if we're not even talking about the therapy part of it, is just like to figure out what's wrong. But I want to ask you one thing. I don't know you that well, but we've hung out a few times, and you seem like a really caring and heart centered guy. You just like really have a warm sense about you. And so you got a business, and I'm sure, you guys hopefully are doing well after 5 years and you're growing and all that. You're probably making a couple bucks. But I'm curious, like, how good does it feel for you to know the ripple effect of how many people out there you're alleviating pain for or helping heal? If you have a couple thousand practitioners and they have dozens of patients each, I mean, the ripple effect of that is thousands and thousands of people are having a better quality of life because you went to engineering school and learned what you did and put together this machine. I mean, do you think about that?
I do, and it honestly, it's one of those things where being in any business, especially starting a business, I think there's a lot of challenges along the way, and you need, or at least I have needed some, extra motivation to push through adversity, to get through the difficult times. And that really is the fuel. It's like, hey, look, if you know what, if we keep creating these amazing experiences for people like this and providing this sort of relief and improvements, I believe things are going to work out in the end. I just got an email actually this weekend from, trying to remember what day it is right now, but this
Monday.
yeah, so this weekend,
It feels like it's already Wednesday.
yeah.
It's a long day today.
From a physical therapist in rural Ohio, and she told me that actually two amazing success stories with the Neubie. One was with a young woman, a high school athlete. So she's got some kids that play on the high school teams, and so treats their teammates. One is a senior in high school who had a Division I basketball scholarship, and then this summer, just so a few months ago, got diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a neurological neurodegenerative disease, essentially that impaired function in her left leg. And so they didn't know if she was ever going to play basketball again. They said, "Look, you may recover, but it's probably going to take a year." All this stuff. She's concerned, like, "Well, I'm not going to get to play in high school. Am I going to get to play in college? Am I going to be able to have quality of life again? Like, where am I going to land in all this?" And so this physical therapist actually sent me. She said, "Hey, I want to show you this video that we did." So this girl went through treatment with this physical therapist, wonderful practitioner named Jackie, and Jackie worked with her. And in about 2.5 months, had her back to 100%. She went out and played in a high school basketball game, and everyone there knew the story. She was having to walk around with support and everything. And so they saw her out and they gave her a standing ovation when she was
Oh,
walked out on the
wow.
court. I mean, it's just this amazing thing. And then there was another um, one of her son's football teammates who had a sprained ankle, was supposed to be out for 4 or 5 weeks, got back in 1 week, didn't miss a game, and was able to go out and play in the state playoffs. And just seeing these, I mean, there's so many of them, but seeing every time I hear one of those, it's like jet fuel. Fuels up the tank to keep going and to keep doing this work.
Yeah, I figured that. I don't know why that just came to mind. I mean, I experienced that a lot too. Doing this thing that I never did before 7 years ago, and I just kind of invented my own niche of a career, and like any career, it has its challenges. But then you get an email from someone that's like, "Oh my God, that one episode changed my life," or "I sent it to my mom, and then she did the thing, and now she's okay." And there's so many of them over the years, and it really does help you kind of keep going when things get difficult and stressful because money can't do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't justify a really shitty, stressful day because, "Oh, I doubled my revenue today." Like, who cares? Doesn't make the day suck any less. Might make your life a little easier on the back end, but not in the moment, you
Yeah.
know? So thank you for sharing that. For those listening that might be familiar with, what is it called? I had it written down here. Oh, TENS, like a TENS unit or E-stim. Is what you're doing here any different than that?
That is probably the most common question that we get, or the most common kind of belief that people have when they see this. They'll be like, "Oh, I see, electrodes on the skin. That must be a TENS unit. Oh, my physical therapy office or my chiropractor, my athletic training room, they have that already." And well, now maybe some of them do, but generally no. Generally they have TENS units, traditional electrical stimulation, and they're all under the same umbrella because they're applying electrical currents to the body. But there are some major differences. The biggest one being this distinction that we already talked about between alternating current and direct current. So the
Mhm.
TENS devices, most of what's out there is alternating current, and there's an interesting reason for that, and that is that direct current, the benefits have been known for decades. So the Soviets, in the heyday of the Soviet sports, com, um, their era, when they were trying to win gold medals to prove that communism was the best system and try to assert their dominance through athletics, they discovered
I
some
think
really
we're doing that in this country now too,
so
without the sports. Sorry, carry on. I digress.
so so they found all these wonderful benefits of direct currents, some of which we've already talked about here, and yet they came against this problem where when they got high enough levels into the body to have these therapeutic effects, it would burn the skin of their athletes or whoever their patients, whoever they're working on. And so because of that, direct current, we essentially threw out the baby with the bathwater, and direct current has fallen out of favor for decades. And so part of the special sauce here is that we've found a way to get direct current into the body, but without burning the skin. So we get these structural and functional benefits of direct current, yet with the comfort of alternating current. And so that there's some electrical sophistication to that in terms of the waveform and the way it's engineered, but it's essentially reducing the resistance that could lead to heat dissipation and therefore burning and things like that. And then also there's some other unique parameters about this that for example, the shape of the waveform is engineered to mimic the way that charges transfer across neurological membranes. And there's certain qualities like the pulse width, so it's a pulse direct current, and that's a balancing act between having enough stimulation that you'll get to the sensory nerves, but not so much that it becomes intolerable uncomfortable or creates some of these other challenges. So
Oh,
there's a lot that goes into it. It's a very interesting exercise to come up with the perfect, or not the perfect waveform, but to optimize all these competing variables.
well, that's interesting because I have a little, I think it's like a little $200 handheld TENS thing I bought. I mean, it was probably 8, 9 years ago. I've had this thing forever. I can't believe it still works. You charge it with the USB, and it's got a couple little, little electrode sticker things. I got it at an airport or something. And it feels good. Put on your neck or something that's sore. I mean, I don't think it has any real like lasting therapeutic value, but for being on an airplane with a sore back or something, I find it useful. And I use it here and there. But you can't turn it up very high because it becomes so painful and so uncomfortable. Whereas with this thing, I mean, sometimes I'll turn it up way higher than I think I can tolerate and without even really warming up, because I think that's how you're probably supposed to do this. You kind of gradually go up until you tolerate. Sometimes I'll just like crank it and see what happens. And there's a little shock initially, and then I'm able to settle into it, and it actually feels good at a really, high setting, which is really interesting. And maybe I'm just a freak. It doesn't. Allison doesn't share that when she does it. She goes very slow and not quite as high, but it feels to me like like getting a massage combined with acupuncture or something, it's like, or like electroacupuncture, where it's like it kind of stings a little, but it's a good sting, if that makes sense. So that maybe that has something to do with that, the waveform that you're delivering with that DC current.
So there's
Because
a
you could crank that shit is what I'm saying, and it still like actually feels kind of good and therapeutic.
yeah, there's a few components to that. One is alternating current. As that signal goes back and forth, sometimes you get those co-contractions that we talked about. You'll get protective contractions, which has these functional effects, but you actually get a sympathetic nervous system, a fight or flight response in the body. And with the direct current signal of the Neubie, we actually see the opposite. We see an increase in parasympathetic function. If you turn it up, that that difference may go away because it'll be like a workout. If you're turning it up to those levels like you're talking about, it'll be like a workout where you get some sympathetic nervous system activity in order to mobilize energy and meet the immediate challenge, and then you shift into the rest and digest parasympathetic nervous system and recover afterwards. But there is a difference in the amount of sympathetic activation you'll get at the same level of current if you compare alternating current and direct current. And one of the things that I did as part of the process here is take the Neubie, take a Russian stim or like a TENS unit, a traditional alternating current device, and we did something where we would match them so it's the same amount of current coming out. So 50 milliamps of current coming out of the Neubie, 50 milliamps of current coming out of this traditional electrical stimulation device. I put one on one arm, one on the other arm, and with the alternating current device, I turned it up that level, and I was just locked. I couldn't move. I tried. I just could not push through it. With the Neubie, it feels just as intense because just as much energy is being delivered, but I'm able to move through it. And so that speaks to a couple of things. It speaks to less of those agonist antagonist, those fighting each other types of contractions. It speaks to less protection overall, and it speaks to more of that signal going into that neurological input, less to like muscle output, more to neurological input. Some of that quality that we talked about, and that's something that we can actually kind of change. We can get more or less muscle contraction or relaxation, but it's actually more in the relaxation spectrum or relaxation side of the spectrum. And so when you turn it up and you feel like, whoa, that's intense, and it feels like it's making you tighten up, it's actually telling you to relax, and it's you fighting against it. But as you breathe through it, as you move through it, you're able to relax through it, and that's part of the process of down regulating those protective patterns or those protective reactions.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I just love the way it feels when it's cranked up. It's like getting a good massage, but it doesn't require anyone else there.
And one other point on that. So TENS, sometimes is referred to as electronic aspirin, where it'll create some of these sensory signals that kind of block or mask the pain. But when you take it off, the pain will come back typically shortly thereafter because you're not necessarily having any of this re-education effect to make any more lasting changes. Whereas this tends to create, not that it's not like one session and anything is cured by any means, but the benefits do do benefits do tend to be more lasting.
Got it. And while we're talking about pain, I mean, not emotional pain, but physical pain, what is it? Like we kind of glossed over that, assuming everyone knows, but I'm kind of curious about the mechanism of experiencing pain. I mean, I get obviously nature designed us so that if we put our hand in a fire, we go, ow, take it out of the fire so we don't burn our hand off. But what's actually happening with pain and chronic pain, and why do we seem to also experience it differently as individuals? Not pain isn't the same to every person. We have different thresholds for pain, bothers some of us more than others, et cetera. So maybe breakdown of some of your perspective on pain in general.
Pain is a fascinating subject, and I was actually thinking about it when you were talking earlier about the holistic approach to dealing with injury, about how your back issue is really stemming from the hips, or how movement in the feet can actually create these rotational forces all the way up the spine into the shoulders and affect the neck, or different things like that. So when you're talking about pain, we really have to look even more holistically. We have to broaden this even more. because for pain, we're going to have to go into something called the biopsychosocial model, taking into account biology in the body and also psychology and social aspects, because they all contribute to pain. So pain is a signal created by the brain. It's a response to perceived threat. So that can be a real or imagined threat, but it's a response to perceived threat. And it's the brain's way of saying, we need to make a change. In some cases, if someone hits you, or if I were to whack you with a hockey stick in the leg or something like that, then it's pretty obvious that there was some damage, some trauma to that area, and your brain is creating pain there as a signal to tell you to use the other leg or stay off that leg, so that you give your body a chance to heal. You don't risk injuring it worse. There's a 1-to-1 correlation. But then there are cases where people have chronic pain, long after the original injury has healed, and you have to wonder, well, why is that? The brain is still perceiving that there's some threat there. It could be because of poor movement patterns and the way that you're loading or using that area of the body. It could be because of some of these other issues that are going on. So the biopsychosocial model of pain tells us that perceived threats to the system can be, tissue based, biological, but they can also be psychological and social. And so if let's say I'm working in a business, and I have a conversation with my boss, and my boss scolds me and tells me that I missed the deadline, I messed up the presentation.
You can swear on this show.
And I'm thinking I'm thinking I'm at risk of losing my job. Well, guess what? There's a deep survival instinct that kicks in, and my brain starts to think, oh shit, if I lose my job, I may not be able to afford rent or food. And there actually is, at a deep psychological level, a survival risk associated with that. But I don't have I'm afraid of losing my job muscle that my brain can make hurt if it wants to create that signal of pain. And so if anyone listening to this, if you do experience pain, hopefully you're not experiencing pain right now in this moment, but if you do experience pain, oftentimes it probably is, and I would be willing to bet that when you do, it likely is always in the same place. So it may ebb and flow, but when it comes on, is likely to be in the same place, because a lot of the reasons that we experience pain are these things that quote unquote should not hurt. Like issues at professionally in your with your job, or an argument with your spouse, or you ate a food that you had an inflammatory reaction to, or didn't sleep as well the night before, or whatever it might be. So the brain, if it's going to create one of these signals of pain, it doesn't want to invest the energy and resources to build a whole new pain pathway. It's going to use a well-rehearsed existing pain pathway, and that's why it's going to tend to reuse that same one. And that's why sometimes if you pay attention to your pain and your symptoms, it'll hurt worse if you're under a deadline or something like that. It'll feel better after a great night of sleep, or when you're on vacation or something like that, when your stress levels are reduced during that period of time. So there's a lot that goes into pain. One of the things that is really important, and one of the avenues by which we're able to help people, is that pain is a response to perceived threat, and that perceived threat is oftentimes somewhere in the body. Like, even if it's a psychological trauma, there is a physical correlate. There's this great field of physiological psychology about how the body affects the brain and the brain affects the body. It's a two-way street. And so if I'm in a hunched forward position and my body language is expressing that I'm sad, it's really difficult for me to feel happy. Like you could tell me great news and I'd be like, hooray. But you can't really feel happy in that body position. Right?
This is fascinating. I love where you're going with this.
And so the experience is, lives in the body somewhere. And like, even if Brandon, who's behind the camera here, if he threw a glass jar at me, I would have this stereotypical reaction. I would reflexively lift my arms up to protect my face and my organs, my more vulnerable areas. But if something is coming at me metaphorically, I'll actually do a little bit of that same thing. I may not lift my arms all the way up here, but I'll have some tightening in the front of my body. I'll have that same sort of protective mechanism. And so these these patterns of protection still exist in the body, even if nothing is coming at us physically. And scanning around, going through that mapping process, we can identify where those patterns are being held in the body and help to work through. So there are some interesting psychological correlates, but there also is a very strong connection there with the experience of pain. And that's part of how we're able to help people with chronic pain. And one other point that you touched on that I think is really a wonderful topic to discuss is why pain is different for so many people, or so different, across people's experience. And part of that is because pain has been shown, looking at functional MRI, looking at images of the brain, there's at least 12 brain areas that have been identified that are associated with pain. And so for some people, it's more of the emotional area and they might feel sad. For some, it might be more of the areas that kind of look into the future, and they might feel a stronger sense of worry of, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to do that activity or play with my kids, or is it going to be like this forever? There's some people that project more into the future, some that people that have different types of experiences based on those brain areas. So there's, if you have 12 different areas, you can have, mathematically, you can have, like, I don't know, thousands or millions of different permutations of that. It's like if you go to Chipotle, there might be 15 ingredients, but if you did every like there could be a billion combinations of those 15 ingredients.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's interesting. There's a couple things there I want to touch on. One is you're so right about the relationship between physiology and your emotional state. And I watched this video years ago. There was a TV show, and it was about it was talking about body language and basically the power of the body over the mind. And they did these exercises where they had people going into a job interview, and they would take on this confident pose where they're like, like a lion and roaring and all this stuff. And then they go in the job interview and be super confident and crush it. And then they'd have people cow down and shrink kind of as you were, and they'd have the opposite effect. And so I saw that show, and I started doing that before I give talks. I still do that just from that one show because it freaking works. I go on stage and I'm like much more open and less self-conscious and just more confident, and just it freaking works. Contrarily, as you were talking, I just remembered this morning, I had kind of a rough start on the day today. And I was in the backyard and I started to kind of feel sorry for myself and just kind of have a F my life moment, which is totally irrational because like my life is great. That's how I was feeling. And I kind of covered my eyes like this and put my hand forward. And I was just really literally feeling sorry for myself, just like, fuck this day. I hate this. And I caught myself doing that, thank God, and then I stopped and just changed my physical posture and sat up and started just taking some breaths and appreciating the sun, and I was able to turn it around. But if I wasn't aware of that, I mean, it could have really colored my day, and that shittiness that I was experiencing early on could have persisted just because the physiology was dictating being in a victimized sort of mindset or a frustrated, hopeless kind of frame of mind. It's so true. As you hunched over, I was like, oh, I actually did that this morning. But thankfully I caught myself, and pulled my head out of my ass and continued on being grateful for my best life.
That awesome that you caught that. And part of the neuroscience of that is that our brains are constantly monitoring our environment, essentially trying to look for threats to survival, right? And so our brains process tens of millions of bits of information per second. Only a small few of those will bubble up into conscious awareness. So there's so much happening beneath the level of conscious awareness. But I think we have to remember that when we talk about the brain constantly monitoring the environment, that of course includes the external environment, what we see, smell, taste, hear, touch. It also includes our internal environment. And so that means temperature and balances of pH balance, carbon dioxide levels, all these different things, and of course the position that we're in. So that is a powerful signal to the brain to give it information about the environment and what's going on. And this, different positions are very different signals that do influence activity in the brain.
Yeah, I mean, think about, I haven't done a yoga class in a while, but I did practice yoga pretty, consistently for a number of years, and I was always amazed, especially Kundalini yoga, I was always amazed how in 90 minutes I could be a completely different person. I could be having like, whatever kind of morning, walk in, spend 90 minutes moving the body in various ways and come out and be like, oh my God, I'm going to have the most awesome day ever. That always tripped me out. And it was so reliable. It's just crazy. Just back in the day, these mystics figured out that, well, if you point two fingers that way and then breathe this way and put your knee over here, it changes the way you feel emotionally and it changes your mental perception of your reality. It's just incredible. The other thing that I thought was really interesting that you touched on was you didn't use this, but I'm just kind of couch it this way is we can have emotional PTSD, right? Where we were hurt emotionally a number of years ago, and then we're carrying that, and it's not yet fully healed. And then something similar happens to us today in the day we're in, and subconsciously, without our being aware of it at all, it reminds us of that thing that happened before. And now we're reacting in a way that's totally not appropriate to the thing that's actually happening. Like a common phrase people use now is being triggered, right? You're being triggered by something. And I never thought about physical pain kind of behaving in the same way. So what you were describing, I almost see as almost like a physical PTSD. All these years ago, I hurt my ankle. It's totally fine. It's totally healed, but the body still kind of remembers what had happened and it's behaving as if it is injured. Is that kind of what you're saying with that? The way the body holds on to pain even though it's not actually real anymore?
I
It's
think
almost like a phantom pain of some kind of physical PTSD or something.
I think that there's definitely a component to that. I think there's a very logical avenue here by which some of this body-based work can help with psychological issues like that. And that's something that I, have seen glimpses of in our work over the years and am fascinated by and would really like to explore and do some more formal research on. But I think there's a component to that. There's also a lot of different layers to that. So, for example, if you have an old ankle injury and it still hurts, sometimes that's because of incomplete rehabilitation. You may have, you know, good strength and muscle output, but you may not be getting as much of the sensory input up to your brain from that area. And so if your brain can't see where that foot and ankle is in space, can't see it as clearly, it's going to try to clamp down and limit movement and try to get you to use that area less. And one tool for doing that, of course, is creating a signal of pain. And so a really kind of instructive thought exercise here is to think about so proprioception is the word that describes how the brain sees the body in space. And so like imagine if we were in this room here and there were a surveillance camera, like your brain was kind of like a surveillance camera looking at you moving around in this room. So here we've got these ottomans, we've got this table, a couple cameras and some lights set up and everything. And so if you're walking around in this room with your eyes open, that's like a clear surveillance camera. You can see everything. And so you can walk with ease around, even navigating some of these complex obstacles here. But if you close your eyes, it's like shutting down that surveillance camera. You can't see as clearly where you are in space. All of a sudden now, your movements are going to be a lot more guarded because you're going to be afraid of like, am I going to trip over this ottoman? Am I going to run over and damage that expensive camera? Am I gonna kick this table with my shins or something like that? And so since you can't see as clearly where you are, you can't predict as accurately what you may run into or what threats, what issues you may encounter. You're going to restrict your movement there. And so sometimes it has to do with a limitation on communication in that area. A good term for that is sensory motor amnesia. So it's like the
Oh, wow.
brain kind of forgets, or it doesn't get much information, and so it kind of, to some degree, forgets where that area of the body is or what it's fully capable of doing. So there's a lot of different components to that, the physiological psychology, and then just that kind of activating that two-way street of communication. And sometimes you need a barrage of energy from a device like this or from good effective movement or manual based techniques or different things You need that barrage of input to remind the brain, like, hey, this is here. Like, hey, you can use this. It's safe. You can, there's it's okay, less threatening. We can open our eyes and see where we are in this room, or whatever the metaphor is.
So a lot of this is about turning on the communication through the whole body system.
Yes,
So the brain is communicating effectively with the body and the nervous system.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's see here. We were talking about the diagnostic capacity of NeuFit and that you can do this scanning. Are there risks or alternative benefits to other diagnostics like x-rays and MRIs? I know often when someone has an injury, they go get an MRI. Are there things that does for you that this can't do? Are there, I've heard negative things about obviously getting x-rays, you're getting exposed to radiation. Some people say that when you get an MRI, the fluid they put into you is like solid deuterium. That's not good for you. I mean, there's a lot of, people that are kind of against those diagnostics, but they have their place. What's your take on just figuring out what the problem is in those methods or what you've come up with?
So there certainly is diagnostic value in X-rays and MRIs and other imaging, and there's times when it's necessary. There's times where a bone is broken and there's a risk that it may not heal, and so you need to put in a rod, a pin, a screw, etc. And thank goodness we have skilled orthopedic surgeons for those cases. There's times where you need MRIs to image soft tissues and identify that they are fully torn, and you do need to repair them or things like that. There are, however, there is, I think, an over reliance on those. There's a famous orthopedic surgeon named James Andrews, and so he's one of the top two or three orthopedic surgeons that a lot of the athletes will go to. So the superstar athletes, when they baseball pitchers when they need Tommy John, or NFL receivers if they have an ACL tear, need an ACL reconstruction, he's one of the top two or three guys that people will go to, bigger name in that field. And he became frustrated with the over reliance on imaging. He was saying to his physician colleagues, "Hey, let's use more of our skills of diagnostics and discernment and physical evaluation, and let's trust our own knowledge more." And so he also thought that imaging, the over reliance on imaging, was leading to more surgeries, unnecessary surgeries. And so he commissioned a small study where he took 30 Major League Baseball pitchers, guys who were actively pitching, who maybe had minor pain or something, but generally weren't experiencing any symptoms, and they were able to go out and pitch and earn hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And he looked at their throwing shoulders on an MRI, and in 25 out of the 30, they found damage that was bad enough to justify surgery. And
Whoa.
and yet none of them were experiencing any pain. And so
Oh, man.
this is another piece of evidence that allows us to draw this there, disconnect damage from pain. We talked about how there can be pain when there's no damage. There can also be damage without pain. So that it's not a one-to-one correlation. We often think, part of why I like to talk about this is that it can be empowering to patients, because a lot of times they think, "Oh, this hurts, it's broken. I'm going to need this brace or this surgery or have to take these anti-inflammatories forever." But there's more to it. There's more to the story. And so in this case, there was a New York Times article where he said, if you want to do surgery, get an MRI or something like that, because you'll almost always be able to find something to justify doing surgery, but that may not actually be a problem for that person. There's other studies that show that something like 50% of people in their 50s who don't have back pain, 50% of them have disc bulges or herniations or things that'll show up on
Right.
an MRI
Right. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you'd think, could justify, at the extreme end surgery, or you think would be causing pain, yet these people are not in pain. And so I do think that there is, I would agree with Dr. Andrews that there's an over reliance on imaging, and that's part of why going through this process, I think, does have some helpful diagnostic ability, like we talked about, where you can see if someone is making significant improvements and they're lasting. That tells us that it's more of a functional issue. And yes, there may be structural damage, and you want to be responsible and give it a chance to heal. But that is not necessarily the structural part is not necessarily the biggest problem. Whereas if you don't see as much of a functional change, that can tell you that, hey, there probably is more significant damage here. Maybe if we haven't already, let's refer out for some imaging, and maybe it's a surgical case, or maybe it's just something where there is damage. We want to keep treating it. We just need to adjust our expectations to know that it's going to take longer because there is more healing that needs to happen.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It reminds me of many years ago. I mean, this is probably, oh, 20 years ago or something. I first started to have this lower back pain, and I went to I don't know what type of physician, but whoever checks you out, and got an MRI, and I had a couple discs that were I don't know, they were, compressed or something, right? And so they wanted to, fuse my spine basically, and thank God, at the time, I didn't elect to do that, but I remember them telling me, "Well, what you have isn't that bad. We see people all the time that have much worse discs, but they experience no pain," and I remember thinking, "What the hell?" They're like, "Yours isn't bad, but we can fix it." And I was like, "Well, what? This makes no sense," and I think that was part of the reason I didn't do it, but it speaks to that, this strange, phenomenon wherein people just experience pain so uniquely, right? Every person. You can have someone who has a super shitty MRI and no pain, and someone that has a pretty good one and has a lot of pain. So I think that that's a really good, example of that.
There's a funny, adjacent, closely related topic here where, in terms of the difference of people who how people experience pain, people who think that they have a high pain tolerance oftentimes are the most sensitive and don't have a high pain tolerance because they're the ones who are more aware of feeling pain. And so they think, oh, I can feel this pain and I can endure it. Whereas the people who really have a high pain tolerance are the ones that are less sensitive and experience less pain overall. The people who you could like hit them and they're like, oh, that doesn't really hurt as much. So the it's kind of this interesting way where we fool ourselves, or we get fooled a little bit by our own perception there. So when someone comes in to get on the machine, for example, they're like, "Oh, you can probably turn it up high. I have a high pain tolerance." It's kind of a funny thing where they're actually not often able to go as high because we get fooled essentially by
That's
that
funny.
perspective.
That's funny. Wow. All right. Um, well, I guess people are probably listening to this going, "Wow, this sounds cool. I have pain. I want it diagnosed. I want to learn how to treat it." And you have all these practitioners out there. I'm curious what the percentage of people that are home users like me. I mean, these things are not cheap. But for someone like me that's experiencing a lot of pain, I don't really care. I want to just get whatever works, and I'm willing to, do what I got to do to make that happen. What percentage of people do you have that are just private users like me versus practitioners? So I want to give people a sense of, how easy it's going to be or difficult for them to actually start to experience, this technology and to use it for themselves.
It's probably close to an example of the 80-20 principle where 80, probably a little more percent of the devices that are out in the world are used in clinics, or in a professional setting, or some, with pro sports teams or universities or stuff like that. Probably a little bit over 80%. So somewhere between 10 and 20% are used by people at home, and that's people like yourself who are either biohacking or health enthusiasts and are interested in putting in the time, or do experience have a real pain point where this can help you. And sometimes uh, you know with the body and movement especially, there is an ongoing requirement for doing it every day. It's not like you can, brush your teeth once and it's like, oh yeah, I'm good for the next year or something like that. It's, same thing with movement. With movement, we have requirements. We need, use it or lose it really applies. And it applies even more strongly as we get older. It applies even more strongly if there's any sort of neurodegenerative or different types of conditions like that. And so there is some movement requirement that you need every day, just some baseline minimum to maintain your health, vitality, and ability of your body. And so this can help you achieve that. Can help you manage pain and stay more comfortable on an ongoing basis. Um, Most commonly, we've seen it used by elite athletes, several professional athletes.
That would be me, obviously.
That's right. That's right. They have their own because they use it to recover. They use it to get in training sessions during the season when it's, difficult to get in the weight room and you have to manage all these different loads and stresses and challenges between games and practices and travel and late nights and bad food and dehydration, to be able to get in these very targeted, quick strength stimulus workouts to maintain strength during the season when it typically starts to die off and decrease during the season, for example, and then to prime and activate the muscles before games, so you're less likely to get hurt and you can perform better, and to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system to do our master reset or vagus nerve stimulation protocol to help recover, you know, on the airplane or between back to back games or just when you're feeling run down during the season, all those types of things. And then there's another big use case with people recovering from surgery or trying to restore function after neurodegenerative diseases or neurological injuries like stroke, spinal cord injury, MS, things like that, because these are situations where you ultimately want to be doing, therapy every day, and it can be more time and cost effective to have a device at home than maybe to go to a clinic or something like that. But there is a network of clinicians that we talked about, and so I certainly would recommend. I think it's the best case scenario if you can find a physical therapist, find a chiropractor, find another professional in your area who's using this. And we have a landing page at new.fit/Luke, neu.fit/Luke. So if people are interested,
Thank
they can
you.
look up, find a provider in your area. Hopefully, there will be one somewhere nearby.
I was going to mention that. Yeah. So it's www.neu.fit/Luke. And I also got word before we started that you guys are giving $1,000 off for the Neubie for people that want to get them. So thank you for that. I
That's
love it
sweet.
when guests come on and they at least, they're going to talk about their stuff. They give a little hookup to the audience. For me, with this kind of thing, and I mean, you gotta understand, for most of my adult life, there was no way any of the things that I have now would be attainable to me in any way. Just because I was waiting tables and a musician and just hand to mouth, right? Eating organic food was like as much as I could spend on my health at some point, and even not that or in the early years. But the way I look at it with some things, it was this way with the hyperbaric chamber that I have downstairs. It was like I think $22,000, which is a lot of freaking money for me too. But I priced out, I wanted to work on my cognition. I priced out going and doing individual sessions. When I went and got a brain scan with Dr. Amen, he said, you need to do 100 hyperbaric sessions to fix your brain. And he seemed to know what he was talking about. So I priced it out. It was like $250 a pop, plus gas, parking, the time to drive there, all that. And it actually made sense to just finance the chamber for me. But that's because I had something that I really wanted to work on. And in this case here, I also have some physical things that I really want to work on. And I went and saw you guys at the NeuFit headquarters here in Austin, which I was so stoked to learn you were here close by. And Alice and I went in and it's like, cool, I'll go pay for, some training with one of your guys. And it was great. But I'm not going to do that 3 times a week. Even if I had the money, I don't have the time. But if it's here, I can do it. So I think for some people like that, it makes sense. But I was looking on your site, and some of the things that practitioners are using this technology for. I mean, I did an edited list here, but these are things that I hear from listeners of the show. Hey, do you know anything like how do you fix this? How do you fix that? Plantar fasciitis, ankle sprain, shin splints, knee alignment injury, which I think is something that Allison has a little bit of, pulled groin, strained quad or hip flexor, obviously back and neck pain, rotator cuff injury, shoulder impingement, tennis elbow, carpal tunnel, arthritis, swelling, recovery from orthopedic surgery. Those are kind of the things that I figured it would work for because I'm getting relief from the pain associated with those type of things. But then, and you kind of alluded to this a few minutes ago, then there are applications for more serious neurological issues like spinal cord injury, TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, and as you mentioned, MS. What are the practitioners doing with those more kind of serious neurological issues? What kind of protocols do they use to get someone, back in the game?
With those patients, it's a similar process in that you're putting the pads on, applying that direct current, combining it with movement. If they can't move on their own, then the therapist might be, lifting their leg or their arm for them, or assisting them in rolling over or crawling or supporting themselves. So it's, maybe regressed movements, but it looks similar. The really kind of the cool breakthrough there is that with patients who need to heal from neurological injury or neurodegenerative diseases, there what we're really after is neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is this wonderful term that gets thrown around. Essentially describes
When people are talking about microdosing.
yeah, right.
You hear that word a lot these
Yeah,
days.
yeah. So another different part of the same concept, but
Yeah.
so neuroplasticity describes how our nervous system adapts to the environment. So it's like why you and I growing up in the US, we may speak English or Spanish, and a child who grows up in China would speak Mandarin because they've adapted to learning the language that they're hearing all the time, as we do here. And so part of neuroplasticity is you essentially need enough input to convince the brain that these pathways, these muscles, these tissues are important. We're going to be using these, and it is worth investing the energy and resources to build up and then maintain those for the long haul. And it takes, for a patient recovering from a stroke or trying to restore function they lost because of MS, it takes a level of commitment and training typically that is on par with a professional athlete. It's hours a day of focused therapy, not just for a day or a week, but for weeks and weeks, for months and months and months, to accumulate hundreds of thousands of high quality repetitions. And then with the recovery in between, because you need to have, need to be able to eat and digest and assimilate the food and have the raw materials to rebuild. You need to be sleeping well at night, because deep sleep is when we rebuild structures of the body. REM sleep is when we remodel the nervous system and assimilate or integrate what we've learned during the day. And so you need to have stimulation. You need to have an effective session, effective recovery, effective session, effective recovery. You have to repeat that ad nauseum for months and months and months in order to create these changes. And so what the Neubie allows us to do is take that physical therapy session and supercharge it so that you're essentially getting the benefits of doing hundreds or thousands of movements in the time that you're doing dozens of movements, because you're getting that barrage of that direct current, that sensory neurological input. So there's still a critical mass of work that you need to accomplish in order to achieve these goals. We're just helping people get there faster. And so where what might normally take 3 years, maybe is 18 to 24 months. It's still a long time. It's not like, hey, you're done in a few sessions. It's not like a sprained ankle or, some of those other more kind of orthopedic, more common things that we see. But it is still a huge value proposition to be able to have a much more significant effect, or be able to get the same effect, in half or 2/3 of the time, or whatever it might be. It certainly varies per person, but that's kind of the value proposition there with those neurological patients, is to tap into that power of neuroplasticity.
That's cool. I mean, if you think about the improvement in quality of life when someone's dealing with something that's that dramatic, right? I mean, oh, I got a sore elbow, a bad back. I mean, you can kind of just mask it and forget about it. But when you're dealing with something like MS or a spinal cord injury, like a small improvement is a huge improvement in your quality of life. So that's pretty huge. That's very cool.
And we've seen certainly a lot of those cases where those small improvements make huge improvements. We've also seen some huge improvements. Like in my book, for example, I tell a story of a woman who has MS, and she, over time just had this decline, where, she had some chronic pain, she lost function, she became wheelchair bound, she had to give up her driver's license, she was working at a school, couldn't work anymore, had to have a caregiver at home. And she, eventually, well, she came down. She actually lives in Wisconsin. Came down to spend a week with us in Austin. Started making some progress. She was able to reduce her spasms enough to where she could bend down to tie her own shoe for the first time in a couple of years. And then she had enough strength to lift her leg, to straighten her leg, extend her knee while sitting in her wheelchair for the first time in a while there. And started having saw progress. So she took a machine home, worked with one of our physical therapists remotely to create a program, and she continued with that. And over time, she got out of her wheelchair, started walking again. She got her driver's license back. She actually
Oh,
went back and started
wow.
volunteering
Wow.
at the school where she used to teach. She got rid of her caregiver at home and just regained her autonomy. I mean, this amazing story. It didn't happen overnight. It took,
Yeah.
18 months of work, and she still, still because she still has this autoimmune condition and this neurodegenerative threat. She still does it, but she was doing 4 or 5 days a week worth of work, treating herself like an athlete for a long enough period of time that she accumulated all these benefits. And you look back at where she was, 18 months prior, and it's just a transformation.
Wow, that's cool. Do you foresee at any time in the future of your product development coming out with something that's more of a home user model that's less expensive and perhaps doesn't have some of the deeper therapeutic value, but just a pocket model Newbie or something that's still useful for people that's a little more attainable if somebody did just have like a carpal tunnel or a minor sprain or something like that?
So we're certainly always looking for ways to innovate methodology, technology, and that is one of the things on our list. As we sit here today, we don't necessarily have a timeline of exactly when something like that would be out, but it's in the works. And excuse me, get another sip of water here.
Well, I got you talking a lot. I got a million questions. You're going to get worn out eventually.
Got there we go. The spring water though is amazing.
That's good. Shout out to Alive Water if you're in Austin or California. And I think they have it in Miami now.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, great spring water delivered to your doorstep.
Nice.
Yeah, it's amazing. You guys could get it in your office, man. It's the same price as freaking Mountain Valley. People, I mean, that's more expensive than tap water, but in terms of bottled water delivered to your house,
we
it's like amazing.
Offline, we got to talk. I know you've done some episodes on this. I'm sure I can just listen to it on the way back home, but
Yeah.
difference between, like, we use reverse osmosis filter and we got some other, trying to be diligent about having good quality water, but
Yeah. Well, at least you're doing that.
Yeah.
On that point, it's a short answer. RO water, I think, is good because it's clean.
Mhm.
You just got to remineralize it and spruce it up a little bit with some restructuring, and
Yeah.
you basically can reconstitute it so that it's like spring water.
Yeah.
I'm a purist, so if I can, I'm going to drink the real deal. But I have a AquaTrue RO system down there, and when I don't have this water, that's what we drink. And we were drinking that for a year and a half before we moved into the house. So.
Yeah.
It's all good, man. As long as your water doesn't have fluoride and a bunch of crap in it, you're winning,
Yes.
I always remind myself there's many people on the planet that don't even have clean, potable, or what do they call it? Potable water?
Yeah.
It's spelled potable. I'm just going to call it potable. What's up with this foot bath you turned me on to, this parasympathetic hack? I did it. I did it one night. No. There's two things I want to ask you. I'm getting them confused. One is the foot bath that I have not done yet, but I have my little foot bath over there ready to do it. I printed out the instructions today, but you taught me this other parasympathetic deal that you said really brought your HRV scores up at night. Could you describe, I don't know, those kind of applications, which are just for general wellness and just kind of tuning your nervous system?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to finish the thought on the personal use device there, where I just want to make sure I mentioned it before. I needed to get some water for my throat there, but um, definitely something that's in the pipeline. I mean, it's probably a couple of years away in term now, having been through the development cycle and knowing how long this truly takes. But definitely something that is in the work, and like you doing this podcast and wanting to get this wonderful message out to more people. We want to be able to touch, to impact the lives of more people, and so that's certainly something that's on the radar there. So in terms of this parasympathetic activation, there's a protocol that we call the Master Reset, and so it's our version of a vagus nerve stimulation. I'm sure most of the people listening know vagus nerve, parasympathetic nervous system. Just essentially, if it's not clear to anybody, it's essentially the rest and digest side of the nervous system, or the feed and breathe side, which counteracts the fight or flight, the sympathetic stress nervous system side of the nervous system. And those are essentially antagonistic. The fight or flight speeds up heart rate, increases blood pressure to mobilize energy to rise to meet an immediate challenge, sends blood out to the muscles, whereas the opposite, that feed and breed or rest and digest, sends blood away from the muscles of the periphery, sends blood more into the organs so we can better digest food, eliminate waste, fuel the reproductive organs, so feed and breed. And that it also slows down the heart rate, reduces blood pressure, and has a calming effect. So we need to spend enough time in that rest and digest state in order to recover from exercise, to recover from the stressors of a day, the stresses and challenges of life. And so many of the health issues that we experience are a direct result of spending too much time in that fight or flight state. So issues with high blood pressure, issues with digestion, elimination, a lot of people have GI issues or constipation. Infertility is something that is affected by that, because too much time in fight or flight means less resources to those long-term growth and repair projects like reproduction.
Oh,
So,
that's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so growth and repair of our own tissues and our organs and things like that, we need to spend enough time in that rest and digest state. And so if you do a guided breathing, like a structured breathing meditation type practice, that has been shown to increase your heart rate variability. So heart rate variability is a measure of the activity of the parasympathetic nervous system. Many people listening, I'm sure, know what that means, but basically what heart rate variability is these subtle increases and decreases in your heart rate with different phases of the breath. And it's basically saying how well am I keeping up with the stresses and challenges of life? If I'm doing well, I have enough bandwidth to respond to subtle changes in my environment, like changes in air pressure as I breathe in and out. And so I'll make these subtle adjustments in my heart rate. Whereas if I'm kind of overwhelmed with all the shit going on out here, I don't really have the bandwidth to respond to those more subtle cues. And so heart rate variability, we actually want more variability, because that means, generally speaking, more of that means that we're doing a better job of keeping up with the stresses and challenges, spending enough time in the rest and digest state. So heart rate variability is a very good metric for health, for resilience, etc. If you do a structured breathing or meditative practice, you'll see heart rate variability increase. If you do that in combination with putting the pads on the base of the skull and the balls of the feet, like we do for the master reset, you'll see that increase in heart rate variability times 2, times 3, times 4, times 5, much more significant, because we're getting stimulation of these very neurologically rich areas, getting stimulation of the vagus nerve directly. The feet are so neurologically rich. There's this whole discipline of foot reflexology, and I don't necessarily. And now that I hear myself saying it, I'm kind of curious to look into it and see how well validated it may or may not be scientifically. But there's these theories of how parts of the foot are reflexively connected to the rest of the body and things like that. And I know that there are strong connections between the foot and certain areas of the body. So like the medial part of the foot has a reflexive connection to the psoas muscle. Middle part, quads, outside part of the arch of the foot is connected to the glute medius. There's connections between the calcaneus, the heel bone, and the hamstrings. So if you mobilize those areas of the foot, you'll see improvements in activation or range of motion of some of these other muscles in the hips and legs, for example. So
That's wild.
there are a lot. There are.
It's also true, if I rub my wife's feet, she will fall asleep in like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It knocks her on her ass.
Yeah.
It'll be like 8 o'clock. We're watching TV. I'm like, I want to rub her feet 'cause it's nice for both of us. And then I'm like, no, she'll fall asleep literally every time.
So there's something to it there for sure. So we stimulate those areas, and we see, as measured by sophisticated heart rate variability measurement tools, see significant increases in heart rate variability there. And so that essentially is telling us that the body is shifting from that stress, fight or flight state into that parasympathetic rest and digest, repair and recover state. And that's a good thing to be doing on a regular basis, is spending more time in that state. So some really good health benefits, for growth and repair and regeneration, healing, pain, also for sleep. So I also, have one of these at home, and my favorite time to do that is before bed. If you're in a physical therapy clinic, you can do it at the end of your session. You can't necessarily bring it home and do it before bed. But doing it at all is certainly better than none. And then, timing can make a little bit of difference. But when I saw with my Aura Ring, my heart rate variability scores just jump up dramatically when I did it several nights in a row. It seemed like there was some cumulative benefit. It took me to see really significant changes in my heart rate variability. I went from like 60 millisecond average to over, I didn't see much movement the first 8 or 9 days, but days 10, 11, 12, 13, I went 100 milliseconds, 120, 140. I got to these numbers that
That's
I didn't even know like the scale
crazy.
went that high.
Dude,
But
my average is around 50.
Mhm,
I don't think it's ever, I mean, even when I look at different points in the night, it's never over 70 probably.
mhm. Let,
That's
let's
crazy.
try that. Try that with you.
Well,
Just start doing that before bed.
when you told me about it, I did it one night, but then I got paranoid because I've been really having terrible tinnitus lately,
Mhm.
and those electrodes going on the back of my neck, I was like, I don't know if it's gonna like make my hearing, get wacky or not. What do you think about that? I mentioned it briefly when you walked in. We didn't really have time to get into it.
That's right. I wanna do a little bit of work on you and see if we can help that. We've seen
Okay.
so we don't I mean, it's one of those things like we're not FDA cleared to treat, tinnitus or tinnitus,
Sure.
we're not so I'm not making claims about it or whatever, but we have seen cases where, people have it and we do some work on the neck, particularly the parts of the neck kind of around and beneath the jaw where the cranial nerves pass through. And we've seen people report improvements there. We've seen people report improvements in other aspects of hearing or things like that. We also do some stimulation on the vestibular nerve, which it's the vestibular cochlear nerve, shared nerve between hearing and the vestibular system. And so there's some things that we've done where we've seen benefits for people, and I think it's worth trying. It's essentially a form of neuromuscular reeducation. It's stimulating the nerves that are reporting that ringing sound or causing you to experience that. If it's happening at different parts in the brain, we may or may not be able to
Dude,
to do it. But
if you can fix that, I will name my firstborn child after you, sir.
I hope it's a
It's
boy.
yeah, right? I know. Sorry, young girl, Garrett. Yeah, it's becoming really problematic. Well, that's good to know because now when I do, I'm usually pretty nonchalant about the experimentation I do. I mean, I put freaking PMF on my head, whatever. I probably push the envelope a little bit out of the realm of safety, but it's kind of just how I'm wired. And I also like to be able to report to people like, hey, I took it too far. Don't do that. I'm willing to take one for the team, but yeah, I got real nervous about the ringing. So that's good to know. On that note, speaking of PMF, do you know any practitioners that are using NeuFit in conjunction with PEMF, like the pulse centers, the really powerful one or anything? Is there any synergy between them that you've observed?
We have a few off the top of my head. I can think of two or three clinics that are using both. There may be more also. It's interesting because there's a fair bit of overlap, certainly some differences, but there's overlap because PEMF is essentially a magnetic field being introduced to the body, whereas this is an electric field. But electricity and magnetism interact in such a way that both an electric field and a magnetic field will cause charges to move, electrical charges to move. That's just basic physics. And there's a lot of similarities. So if you have like that pulse centers or something and you feel it pulsing click 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 5 times per second or something, if you turn this to a frequency of 5 per second and you put it on, it'll feel similar.
Oh, right, right.
This is going to be more specific, and so it's I think more about neurological function. That's going to be more general, and I think more about blood flow, energy to the area, more effects on inflammatory conditions or things like that. So I think it's sort of like a Venn diagram. There's some overlap, there's some differences, but they certainly can play well together. And I like. I mean, I like it. I think it's the where the overlap is though is that there's kind of different ways to get to the same place, and that biggest difference probably is that kind of more general. The magnetic field is just going to kind of go everywhere in the path, whereas this is going to be a little more specific.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then what about the foot bath?
Mhm.
And on the note of the foot bath, I before I had the Neubie, I was using it a lot over at the ARX headquarters on Sundays.
Mhm.
We all Mike and the guys, they let a few of us in to use their machines and stuff like a little friends and family Sunday workout. And I've been pretty consistent with it, so I like to use it over there. The other day I was over there and I asked him, I was like, "What's up with the foot bath thing? How do you do it?" And he was explaining it to me. And he goes, "No, bro, what it is, the real shit is you do a bath, the full body." And I have a really big tub here. And so I don't, maybe that's off label. I don't know if you can speak to that, but he's like, "No, you You put the electrodes in there the same way you do the foot bath, but your whole body gets buzzed. And I was like, that sounds cool, but I want to check with Garrett before I go off the rails with that.
So
Because electricity and water obviously typically don't mix, but we're dealing with I'm sure a shielded or gated DC current. It's a little different than throwing a hairdryer in your bathtub.
so yes, it is different because we're putting the electrodes in the water. Be sure you do not put the device itself in the water. That could be problematic.
Expensive too.
Yeah, so yes, you don't want to do
Void
that.
warranty.
Yeah, right. So when we're putting the electrodes in the water, so the foot bath, we typically would have one of the pads on your body, and then the other one is going to be a conductive, carbon silicone electrode just floating in the water. And there, what'll happen is that instead of just being more concentrated at the electrode, the current's going to disperse more throughout the water. So with the feet and hands, that's valuable because they're so neurologically rich. There's so many mechanoreceptors, so many sensors and nerve pathways there. And if you disperse the current throughout the water, you're able to stimulate more of them. And so that tends to be beneficial to get that barrage of input spread throughout these very neurologically rich areas. They have huge representations in the brain, and just a really target rich area here to stimulate. So if you had pads in the bathtub, it would be the same sort of thing, where if you had some pads down by your feet and then others up at your waist or up by your shoulders or something like that, the current's going to be dispersed throughout there. So you can spread it out a little more. It'll be less concentrated at the feet probably, and just more kind of spread, more dispersed throughout the whole body. And so you may feel it in different places. It may be more or less sensitive at certain places, because of where the current's going to be spread and less concentrated and things like that. But definitely something you can do. Especially if you have a device at home.
I'm doing it.
But just be careful not to get the device.
Yeah, clearly. Now with the foot bath, you're putting in the little rubber disc into the water, and then you're putting one of the sticky electrodes on your skin outside of the water, right?
So you can do it that way. You also could just have, if you had 2 buckets of water, you could have one floating in one and one in the other, and then it would kind of go up one leg and down the other.
Oh, okay. So a red in one and a black in the other, a positive and a negative.
Could do that. We typically have, so a lot of times we do this with neuropathy patients, and we'll have one pad on the body up along the spine where the nerves are exiting the spinal cord, so that we're getting stimulation along that entire nerve pathway, because you're creating that electric field gradient along the entire nerve pathway, which we believe will influence that healing to happen there, to repair, rebuild, whether it be the myelin sheath or some, axon, collateral sprouting, or different things like that. Some sort of healing and regeneration. So there's value in doing it that way. But essentially, you need to close the electrical circuits. You need to have 2 points of contact. So typically one up on the body, and then the other with that electrode floating in the water.
And how do you get 2 points of contact if you're putting it in a whole bathtub?
So that you want to make sure
your body's in there, so there's no dry part of your body to stick it on.
Right. So one way to do it is to have your shoulders out, and then put sticky pads on your traps.
Okay.
And then have the other ones, the rubber conductive ones, floating down by your feet.
Got it. So would you have one negative and one positive on your body, and one negative, one positive in the water?
You'd actually, then if you did that, then the charges would probably move between those and between these.
Oh, okay.
You want to have both positive at one end, both negative at the other end.
Okay.
So the gradient is like longitudinally from head to toe.
Cool. I'm doing it. That sounds fun. Now that I've heard it from the man himself, that as long as I do it right, I'm safe. I think that sounds really cool. Now, we've been talking mostly about the application as it has to do with rehabilitation and injury healing and things like that. But there's also a massive fitness component of this. So I wanted to just cover that for the fitness enthusiasts out here. One thing you did when you came over the other day was we did the bicep workout with no weights, using the training mode on here, right? and I have no weights in my hands. We put the electrodes on my biceps, and then I'm doing curls with 0 weight, and it's like I have 60 pounds in my hand or whatever, it's just insane. And you told me, you're like, "You're probably gonna be sore tomorrow," and I'm like, "I don't know, I do curls all the time, I'm never sore." Sore as hell the next day or the day after, whenever it was. So I think that was really interesting. So how, I guess, are athletes using this, modality for peak performance and fitness?
One of the things that we talked about a little bit was how we can preferentially contract or relax muscles here. And on the therapeutic side, we most commonly are doing more of the relax, where we're bypassing contraction, sending a lot more of that sensory neurological input. However, we can shift some of the settings. As part of what's in one of our patents, and part of the special sauce here is that we can shift some of the settings to create more muscle contraction and increase recruitment. So you can actually get the benefits of weightlifting, for example. So like if you were just doing a bicep curl with no weight in your arm at all, moving just the weight of your forearm and your hand is not much. You could do this all day and not feel, you know, you could do hundreds of these and not feel a ton of fatigue, like not be sore, probably not get a ton of effect or depletion or breakdown of muscle or anything like that. But if you have a weight in your hand, the difference is that to move that weight, it forces you to recruit more muscle fibers to create more tension to create enough force to overcome the force of gravity on that weight. And what we're doing at those settings when we did your arm workout is we're actually using the Neubie, using that signal to increase recruitment. So you're getting a lot of the benefit. You're getting a lot of the muscle recruitment and a lot of the benefits as if you were lifting heavy weights, but without having to lift those weights and not put as much strain on your joints, not have as much risk of injury. And so for people who are recovering from injury, for people who lack the mobility to get into certain positions, or for whom it wouldn't be safe to load up with traditional resistance exercise, or for athletes who are at certain points in the season where they need some strength stimulus to maintain, but they don't necessarily want to load up with a heavy bar and do squats and deadlifts or things like that. There's applications here where you can do this. And one of our first peer reviewed published journal articles talks about how, or shows that you actually get a similar effect in muscle from using the Neubie like we did with no weight, compared to using 75 or 80% of your one rep max. So a weight that you could do, 8 to 10 times, for example.
That's crazy, dude.
You get a similar effect there. So
Well,
that
so what's really cool about that, and I think you touched on this, was like there's, I think, less or maybe no risk of injuring yourself from moving outside of your range of motion, right? And that's why I like, the X3 bar, have that in the backyard, the ARX machine. I like these things where you can really push yourself in terms of resistance training, but it's almost impossible to injure yourself or like, bust a joint because you're in the range of motion and you can't really move out of that. Is that the case here? Where, it's much safer, but if you crank this thing way up in training mode, I mean, you could get where like you could barely move, but it's not like you're gonna snap a tendon or something, right?
So exactly. So it's safer in that regard, but there's also, there's trade-offs to everything in life. And here with great power comes great responsibility. Good quote from Spider-Man, right? So here, like, we only did 2 minutes worth of curls. Maybe we did 50 movements or something like that. Whatever the number was, we did about 2 minutes worth of just you bending and straightening your arm. And I said, even though you're not going to feel fatigue now, and even though it doesn't feel like you may not feel like you did that much, in 2 days you're probably going to be sore, and you were. So that, with great power comes great responsibility. We don't want to like make you debilitatingly sore for a whole week. And so we want to choose an effective dose. And so there with exercise, it's like medicine. You choose the exercise, which is like choosing the medicine, then you choose the dose and the timing. And here we want to make sure that we start with that, just 2 or 3 minutes in the beginning, see how you respond, see how sore you get, make sure you recover effectively from that, make sure you treat it like a workout. So you're hydrating, you're getting enough amino acids in so you can rebuild, you're getting enough sleep, all those sorts of things. Limiting alcohol because that can
Oh,
be
I'm good on a
problematic. That
couple
can
of those. I got great sleep. I got my Keon
there
aminos,
you go.
and I haven't had a drink in 25 years, sir.
There you go. Very good.
So I can just go nuts, in other
So
words.
you could so maybe now you can go from 2 minutes to 3 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, right, right, right.
But it's one of those. I mean, that the positive side of that is you can get, all you need for your arms, your biceps and triceps in 2 or 3 minutes worth of work. You can do this, a really quick, efficient workout for strength and hypertrophy. In the second study, we looked over the course of a whole training cycle and saw similar muscle growth over it was either 6 or 8 weeks. Similar muscle growth compared to using the Neubie with no weight compared to, again, 75 or 80% of 1 rep max traditional resistance exercise. So you can get that done in just a few minutes per body area, which is the plus side, the time efficiency and the safety. And then, at the other side, there's that point you just want to be careful not to overdo it, because it is a very powerful tool. It needs to be respected.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you for that. Okay, let me see here. Oh, I know what I wanted to do. I think we're good. But I do want to do a little demo for the people that are watching on video, and for those that are not watching on video and you're just listening to this, you can go to lukestory.com/Garrett, Garrett, and we're going to put all the things we talked about in those show notes. And there, for you listening, you'll also find a link to the video. So if you are listening to this whole audio and you want to see a little of this action, you can go to those show notes and find it. But I thought it'd be cool to do a little of the scanning, the diagnostic. I mean, we won't be able to do as much as we would in a real training session with you or another practitioner, but people can kind of get the idea of what we're talking about. Because I know if I was listening to this, I would be annoyed because I would want to see it. What does the freaking thing look like? How does it work? So maybe you want to do that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. And in the last couple minutes we have. Oh, and also let's give a shout out to your book here on my camera, which is called The NeuFit Method. And thank you for bringing that over. So hopefully my editors catch that shot. And you do have some really good endorsements here on the back. Terry Walls, Dave Asprey, a couple of heavy hitters there. Thank you for bringing that. And for people obviously that want to learn more, I'm assuming everything you just talked about is in here at even greater depth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It talks about some of these really powerful principles of neuroscience, and then how to apply those in daily practice for sports injuries, for recovering from surgery, chronic pain, some of these neurological injuries or diseases, and then fitness and optimization, and how to track and monitor the health of the nervous system over time too. So
Cool. Cool.
kind of
And
throughout that whole
I saw
continuum.
this on your site. People can get it there too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. All right. Rad.
All right. So we want to have an electrical circuit, which means we want to have 2 points of contact. So
Okay.
can I maybe put this on your low back again, just get it
Sure.
out of the way?
Yep.
Like we did there. All right.
Right. So that's our point of contact. And then your scanning is going to be done with the little wet sponge.
That's right. That's right. So
Does that act as like a ground, the one you put on my
exactly, yeah,
back?
essentially
Okay.
an electrical ground. You need to have a positive, negative.
Sure.
And I know, like when we were doing your back, for example, we were scanning around on your back. So now if we're looking at your arm, I'm going to do this process, same sort of thing, where I'm going to turn it up to we'll call it a nice medium level, so that 4 or 5 out of 10, not uncomfortable at all,
Okay.
just like we did the last time we were together here.
I'm feeling that out on my lower back.
Okay.
I'm feeling both.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 1 to 10, how would you rate that if you had to put a number on that right there?
6 to 7.
All right, I'm gonna back
Yeah.
off a little bit. So 6 would be like a little hint of where it's a little bit uncomfortable.
Barely. Yeah.
Okay. Let me
Yeah.
back off till no discomfort there. So I backed off a few points.
No discomfort there.
We down to like, what would you call that?
5.
Okay.
4 or 5. Yeah.
Okay. That's where we want to be. So
Yeah.
now what we're gonna do is we're gonna scan over your body like this. So if you're not watching, I'm dragging this electrode over Luke's forearm here. And there's essentially 3 things that we're looking for. So one is just like this, where it's buzzing, not uncomfortable at all. That's just, you're getting the sensation of the signal here. And what that's essentially saying is, your brain is seeing that and saying, oh, that's just Luke being Luke. Like, nothing to worry about. There's some stimulation happening, but it's within our kind of safety window. Nothing to be alarmed about.
Sure.
We may go over an area, like we may go here where we see a contraction. Like, see if
Yeah.
does that make your muscle contract a little bit.
Yep, yep.
If you weren't holding on here, maybe the arm would bend a little bit. Oh yeah, it made you kind of supinate your forearm a little bit. So when your biceps start to contract. So if we see contraction, we go over a motor point where the nerve is closer to the skin. It may contract. But what we want to distinguish here, or what we want to do is try to distinguish, is that just contraction or is that actually uncomfortable? So I want to ask you that question. Is that just contraction or is it actually uncomfortable?
Just contraction.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what we want to do then is scan around and look for the third possibility here. So we had some buzzing, not uncomfortable, had some contraction, not uncomfortable. We want to look around and see if there's any spots where it is alarming, where we scan over an area and either because you're guarding and protecting there, or your brain's trying to limit output there, or it's hypersensitive and has some of these perceptions of threat that would lead to chronic pain potentially. If we stimulate any of those areas, your brain's going to see that and say, oh shit, that's either new because that's more signal than we've seen from there recently, or we're stimulating an area where there's that protection or hypersensitivity. So if we stimulate any of those areas, your brain's going to see that, and that perception of threat is going to trigger pain, like we talked about earlier. So it's going to be, it'll feel kind of like a trigger point or something like that. But where it's actually uncomfortable or alarming or threatening, we want to look around and find one of those spots. So we'll scan around and see if we find any of those here.
Right there. Yeah.
So it's contracting, but is it actually uncomfortable also? Based on your body language, it seemed like it may have been.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, definitely just contracted,
yeah.
In a pronounced way.
Okay. So if it went to, if it was like a 4 or 5, did it go up at all in that?
Yeah, to like a 7 probably, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the most so far.
Ow. Oh, right there. Now that is, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So that lateral tricep,
Oh, boy.
what'd that get to?
9.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is.
See, that's so interesting because you go up and down the whole arm with your electrode there. Like you said, just you notice it, but it's not uncomfortable. You get there and it's like, oh, that really hurts.
So that's a little bit
Pins
of that,
and needles.
a little bit of that brachioradialis, a little bit of the lateral tricep potentially.
A little bit of Apple trackpad for way too many years, too many
Do you
hours.
have any issues in your elbow?
I have had some, tennis elbow kind of stuff going on there.
Okay.
Did some PRP on it years ago that improved it a lot. So it's not chronic now, but it comes and goes. Yeah.
Okay. So let's find that.
Yeah, right there, Bubba. Ooh,
all right.
Holy crap.
We found that now. Let me grab this pad from.
I wish I could give everyone listening the opportunity to feel what that felt like. It's hard to describe.
All right. So
now he's putting the actual, what do you call this?
Electrode or pad.
Okay, he's putting the electrode, the sticky one now, on that exact spot.
So let me just see if we're on the right spot there. Is that the right spot?
Ooh, that hurts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're on that area. So
okay.
Of course, if we're doing a full evaluation, like we did the first time, we could scan your whole torso, your whole upper body, your whole body.
Mm-hmm.
But just for demonstration purposes, we found that spot. Let me just compare real quick. What's going to be more uncomfortable between that combination there and this one here?
The first one for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go with that.
Did you put this sticky electrode on the exact spot where I was feeling the most reaction?
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah. So
okay.
what we're going to do here for the treatment, we'll do a little, miniature, little quick demo.
Cool.
With the treatment here. I'm turning it down as we place this pad here.
Thank you for that. I've learned that the hard way a few times.
Yeah. Right. So now I want to turn it up here for the treatment. I want to go outside your comfort zone. I want to elicit that same response where it feels uncomfortable because sometimes in life we have to be outside our comfort zone in order to make change, to cause adaptation. But it's not excruciating. It's not a 10 out of 10. So tell me when we're at a 7 or 8 where it's productively uncomfortable, where we're essentially eliciting that same type of reaction that we had when we were scanning.
Okay. Yeah, right there is pretty intense but tolerable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Feels like it's getting in that kind of painful area there.
It is. And the interesting thing is, like, when you're doing the scan, because it's going over, there's contrast between the areas that aren't very reactive and then you hit that spot. It's like sudden impact. But when you have the electrodes on here and then you're dialing up the intensity, I find I'm able to kind of surrender into it and allow it to be more intense.
Good.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And that's a good thing.
Because there's no contrast. The whole thing's just zzz
Right.
now, right? You're
Right.
not. It's not chill and then not chill.
Yeah. It's that, yeah, that's less of like kind of shock and surprise because you have it on
Yes.
there more consistently.
Yeah.
So that allows us to go higher on the machine, and it allows us to have this adaptation process. So let's actually have you do a
Mhm.
few just flex and extend, do a few kind of circles of the elbow there. Here, let me just get these wires
Okay.
over here. So what we're going to do here is we're stimulating the areas where we found that hypersensitivity, that greater, more reactivity, sense of protection, whatever it was there. We're stimulating that area, and also having you try to move through it. We're having you move for a couple of reasons. One is that if there's any sort of deficit in activity of those muscles, you're going to learn to start incorporating them into your movement patterns again. So we can accelerate that process of neuromuscular reeducation. Another thing that we're going to do is through moving, especially moving your joints, you're creating a lot of other neurological input to your brain. And so it allows your brain to more clearly see that area, increase that sense of proprioception, reduce the perception of threat in that area. And that allows you to reduce the perception of threat associated with the signal from the machine, where initially you had that really elevated perception of threat. You were fighting against it. It's uncomfortable. It's painful. As you downregulate that, and movement helps you do that, as you downregulate that, you're actually reducing the perception of threat in that area, which is going to mean you're going to be doing less, holding less tension there, or less inhibition. So it's sometimes we think about, in order to get stronger, we have to hit down on the throttle harder of the car or build a bigger engine. Sometimes we just have to take our other foot off the brake so that we can
Right.
use the muscle or use the power that's already there. So disinhibition is like taking your foot off the brake, or like turning off the governor that's limiting the force output there. And so this allows us to do that, to
That makes
change those
perfect
neurological
sense.
patterns.
That makes perfect sense. That's what's. You know what I just realized today too, that the way you spell it, the Neubie, it's like neurology. I
Yeah.
never got that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, why
Neurobioelectric.
didn't he just spell it NEW? I was like, oh right, neurobiology. So
Yeah.
cool.
So now that you've adapted to it, it's based on your body language, it seems like it's easier to
It's
handle,
totally
right?
chill now.
So let's go up just one more time and
I
repeat that
shouldn't have
process.
said anything.
No, man,
Okay.
it's still painful.
Oh yeah, ooh, that'll get your attention.
All right, good. So we went up 4 points on here.
Ooh,
So 4 volts, about 4 milliamps of current we increased there.
So what I'm likely feeling here is some inflammation that could be a gradient of tendonitis or something,
So
right?
there can be some of that. I mean, what you're really feeling here, I think we have to go back to those basics of what you're feeling is pain, and pain is always in our brains, right? If someone says
Right.
pain is in your head, you can say, yeah, it is for me and for everybody else.
Right.
So you're experiencing that as a response to perceived threat because of the load that we're placing on this area of the body. And so
Mhm.
we need to teach you to start accepting that, to allow more function, more length, more strength, et cetera, in that area. And so if there's a lack in that, length or strength or function, that could lead to some of those tendonitis symptoms, or the tennis elbow,
Got it.
epicondylitis, whatever it is, type of symptoms. But what you're feeling here is most likely a brain response to the perceived threat of loading these muscles here and trying to challenge the function of these areas.
Got it. Feels good. I mean, I
Nice.
don't know if am I like psycho that I think it feels good, or do other people have that experience too? Because when I put on Allison, she's like, too much. I don't think she perceives it to be like pleasurable.
So there's differences. I
It's
mean,
like getting a
like,
massage.
yeah, let's like you talked about, the differences in how people experience pain, but really the difference in how people experience sensation overall. So we'll turn
Mm,
that down there.
okay.
Some people like massage. Some people like being touched. Some people don't really like being touched.
Right.
And that can have to do with all sorts of different, associations, experiences, things going on, whatever. But the nice thing about this is that there's a power dial, and so you can be up in the 30s or 40s, and Allison might be in the teens or 20s, and
Well,
you both can get what you need.
that's what's cool, that the way this is designed, you have 2 channels, right? Each channel obviously has 2 to it, so there's 4 total for those watching, but you could be doing a therapy session or a workout with another person, and you each have your own independent whole situation going on, which is kind of cool.
That's
It's
right.
actually a fun like couples
Yeah.
thing. Looking forward to doing it more with her.
Yeah. My wife and I, we do that at
You
home.
do?
We do some couples training for
That's
sure.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. That's like, always looking for more interesting, novel ways to spend time with one another.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like the days over, we end up just watching TV, and I'm always like, this is such a waste of doing something together. We get to
Yeah.
be doing something more fun.
Yeah. And if you can do
It's
something
cool.
that, you like doing anyway, if you like working out or something,
Yeah.
to be able to share that together is a good way to bond.
Totally cool. Well, I'm glad we got to do that little demo, and I hope people were able to see the video because
How does your elbow feel right now?
it feels awesome actually. I was gonna say that right when you pull the electrodes off, it feels like I got a massage. I mean, that's how I kind of always describe this type of therapy. Yeah, it's just like everything's kind of looser, and you can feel blood flow in there. It feels like there's a concentration of energy,
Mhm.
kind of warm. Yeah, more fluid. It's just so cool. Dude, you created something so awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing it. Thank you for coming by to share it with me and all the listeners that are tuning into this. Yeah, I don't know. I just never seem to get sick of discovering cool stuff like this. And the fun part for me, and I'm so blessed to be able to actually meet the people behind it, and then broadcast your discoveries out to the world.
I appreciate it. I mean, to be able to come on this podcast with all the great topics you've covered and great guests you've had, and be able to share our message is just really wonderful. So I'm grateful to you and the work that you're doing, and love being here. And
Thanks,
glad
brother.
you're in Austin now too.
Thanks, brother. Me too. Everyone cool is here. I was so
That's right.
stoked. I was driving down. What are you guys on? B Caves Road?
360, right,
Oh,
right
around
near
360.
BK's.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was driving. I was like, "There's a new fit," and that's Alice and I came in there. I mean, I met you here, but I didn't put it together that your like corporate spot was here. And for people in Austin too, they can come train at your main location too.
Yeah, we have
Yeah.
currently 5 physical therapists and 5 trainers. So we're working with people, neurological injuries, sports injuries, people who want to work on fitness or elite athletic performance. We kind of we use it as our certainly a way to serve people in the community. Also, a teaching facility. So we'll have clinicians, people coming in from around the country to learn and observe. We use it to test new protocols and try to work and innovate. So we're doing some cool stuff there and working with people for a wide variety of challenges, injuries, all sorts of stuff. But
It's a cool
it's a
spot. I
great,
was
yeah.
surprised to find that it was like there's so much gym equipment in there. I mean, it's essentially like a gym that has incorporated this technology, which I wasn't expecting. I mean, there's people in there like working out with this thing attached to them. It's pretty cool.
And it's cool because people will be doing physical therapy and then they look across and they see people working out. It's kind of like aspirational too. It's like, hey, I can do that.
Right. You have someone that's like got an injury or this, needs real help. And then there's a pro athlete across the way from them just crushing it.
Yeah.
That could be really sad or inspiring, depending on the kind of mindset you have.
True.
Who have been 3 teachers that have influenced your life that you'd like to share with us before we go?
That is such a good question. So I think about it in terms of categories. One is jumps out at me as a teacher who first showed me the power of physiological psychology, like we talked about here today, and how body position can inform your psychology or all these different things, and also taught me was kind of the role model that comes out to me when I think about how I want to be in the world. So it's a man in his 70s named Jamin McMillan who has a discipline called spatial dynamics, and he's still at age 70 plus is powerful, strong, flexible, moves with grace, has a wonderful presence. And I went through his certification program. So I was with him multiple times a year for several years back 10, 15 years. It was over a period of a few years. So, it was a long time ago, but he is to me kind of a bright shining light example of what it is to live your kind of highest values and truths over a long period of time, and just the accumulated wisdom, the way that he showed up in the world, the way that he taught other people in his certification program was just such a good role model for me. And the material around physiological psychology and movement therapy influenced me a lot. So he's one that jumps out. My first mentor around that same time that really showed me the functional neurology is a guy named Dr. John Pietola, has a system called NeuroTarget. And he was the first one to really show me the power of applying neuroscience into daily practice and how it can affect outcomes, and really show me, kind of open up my mind to the possibility of what a nervous system first approach can do. Um, and then teachers wise, I think another category. So I've got kind of how I show up in the world. That one jumps out. A lot of the neuroscience and work that I do. I think about some of the kind of spiritual life business stuff. I think two jump out there. I've learned with through books. David Data, The Way of the Superior Man. That book jumps out because it helped me early on in my career understand that as a man, the masculine part of me is really fulfilled by creating, impact and influence in the world, and having that kind of sense of direction out there is what really energizes me, and that's okay, and that my then girlfriend, now wife, is motivated. The feminine part of her is energized and enlivened by different sorts of things, by the flow of energy and love in relationships and things like that. Also, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Also in the
Oh,
relationship,
so
yeah.
good.
That's
Both
John
of those.
Gray.
Yeah, I've interviewed John Gray a number of times. I
Yeah.
learned I use his stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Like this house and the peace you feel here is he's partly responsible for that.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
those
really.
those have really had an
Both of
impact.
those, yeah.
Yeah.
David Data, he doesn't do podcasts. I tried to get him back in the day, and I think it even says on his website, like, we don't do interviews, don't even try.
Mhm.
But his one of his protege, John Wineland, who just moved here to Austin, actually, he's been on a few times with that same model. Really useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. It's cool that you mentioned both those. They've impacted me a lot as well.
Awesome. And then
Yeah.
on the topic of relationships, I mean, just in that same category, I think my wife and our marriage has been a great teacher for me. And there, learning the value of um, different attributes and different perspectives. Sometimes, she and I will look at things differently. She works in the business with us. She's our chief operating officer. Um, so in business and at home, we'll look at things differently, and sometimes that creates tension because I'll think, why don't you see it this way, or
Yeah.
how can you? But learning, to that, I'll say, to grow through conflict. I don't, not necessarily, there's some conflict, some tension. I don't necessarily mean like fighting conflict, but
Mhm.
learning to grow through that. And then learning the value of different perspectives about how looking at things through different lenses, using different attributes, having logic and emotion, having big picture and more detail oriented, kind of having that more complete perspective allows us to really be a team and arrive at better conclusions and decisions together, and help kind of guide each other. So learned a lot there too. So those are the ones that jump out at me. I've had a lot of wonderful mentors and teachers along the way, in school, through books, in workshops. I've learned a lot from the people that we work with, the practitioners that have these devices. We collaborate and find ways together to take this to even new levels and help even more people. So there's a lot of them, but those are the first ones that jump
Thanks,
out.
I appreciate it. You far exceeded the 3 that I requested. A lot of people, they'll get to 1 and they're like, "I don't know, man, I can't think of any more." And then others are like, "Oh, there's too many." No, I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that. And, yeah, I'm excited to share what you do with the world. So thank you so much for coming by today.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.